everyone. Thank you very much for joining the Colfax Bus Rapid Transit Community Meeting. It is 5:31, so we're going to go ahead and get started here and share our presentation. Excellent. Well, thank you all for making your evenings available to us tonight to talk about bus rapid transit on Colfax. I'm Miles Graham. I'll be your moderator for the evening. And tonight we've got a packed agenda, so we're going to jump right into it on this next slide. And what you're going to see, we want to do a quick project update just to let you know where we are in the process and what the status of the project is. From there, we're going to go into looking at some of the refined design concepts that, based on all the community input we have received to date, we've incorporated it into some updated designs we're going to show you tonight. And then we're going to get into a conversation on naming the BRT system, which we've got our full project team here to walk us through the process and the context for that. And then we're going to go into a little bit of a preview of where the project is going to go from here as we begin to look at traffic and the parking analysis and our methodology and our approach for that. And then another very important topic that is going to continue to show up on our agendas, it's the resources that are available for our small businesses as we begin to get closer to construction. And we've got many Q&A discussion points broken into our meeting tonight. So lots of opportunities for you to raise your hand, ask questions, drop them in the chat. You'll see on this next slide that you're going to be able to find your mute buttons and your video buttons and raise your hand. As I said, we've got multiple Q&A and discussion points. So anytime during the meeting, you can submit your questions via the chat to Abby Abel, who you'll be able to find as a co-host. And she just dropped a message in the chat for you all. And then as we get to our discussion zones, I believe we have 3 of them here tonight. We're gonna ask you to raise your virtual hand and we'll allow folks to unmute and ask their questions. We hope to have a good dialogue tonight and answer as many of your questions as we can. The team will also be around a little bit after the meeting ends if needed to answer some additional questions. And what you're gonna see on this next slide is our project team. We're joined by the project leadership from the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. We've got David Krutzinger, our transit director, Brian Pinkerton, who's our project principal, and Brian McLaren, our project manager. Our subject matter experts from the project team presenting tonight are Kevin Ashby with Iron Horse Architects, Sean Lingle with Jones Worley, who's doing the branding and the naming, and Charlie Alexander with Farron Piers, who's going to walk us through the traffic methodology. And we're also joined by Joanne Greek with the Denver Economic Development Opportunity Office. She's a small business manager who's going to be walking through some of those resources that are available. And we also have Susan Wood, who's going to be given a brief presentation on some of the improvements you're seeing today with the 15 and the 15L on Colfax. So with that, I'm going to pitch it over to David Krutzinger to introduce our partners, starting with RTD.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. I wanted to say thanks to everyone for being on the phone and acknowledge our partners who are funding partners or right-of-way partners or our other governmental partners. We have Susan Wood on this evening from RTD, and there's so many people that have joined. I didn't see so far any of our other partners on the phone, but if you are on, please raise your hand and we'll make sure to introduce you. Other than that, I'll turn it back to Miles.
Thanks, David. And I do see, and I'm probably going to miss someone, but maybe it'll give us a chance to raise some hands and introduce some of our other partners. I know we've got Tom Worker Braddock with us, it looks like, from the city of Aurora, who's one of our key partners along with CDOT, the Federal Transit Administration, keeping our city council representatives engaged throughout, and then our equity and accessibility partners who are well represented on our community task force as well. And I see a couple of our task force members, Gary Van Dorn, I wanted to acknowledge with the Colorado Cross Disability Coalition, and I believe Miles Pangolin is also on from Congress Park. And I'm sure there are others that I'm missing, but just wanted to acknowledge the important work of our community partners on that task force who have helped us get ready for this meeting tonight. So on the next slide, we're going to walk through a really quick project update, and I'm going to flip it to our principal project manager, Brian Pinkerton, to just walk us through where we are in the process. Brian?
All right, well, good evening, everybody. Thank you again for joining us. This is a picture you've likely seen before. So it's just kind of a bird's eye map of the Colfax BRT corridor. You see on the left there in the yellow is the downtown Denver stations. The blue is the area of center running and the identified stations, and the orange is the location of BRT in Aurora, where it would be side running and mixed traffic, and you see the stations identified there. Okay, next slide. You can see our timeline here. You've seen this before. We're still looking at early 2028 to actually have the BRT operational and in revenue service. We are looking for every opportunity we can to accelerate that, but we can just walk through these steps that we have identified real quickly. Right now, we are in this preliminary design, engineering, and environmental review, that first green dot. In August of 22, we'll be asking for a rating of the project by the Federal Transit Administration. That rating is the first step on the merits as to us seeking grant funding from the federal government. And then in 23 and 24, going through final design. And that star just reminds us that public engagement is continuous through all the design phases and even into construction. And then we would apply for the grant, and according to this schedule, in 24 or 25. And assuming we were successful with that, bidding, construction, and bus acquisition would be in that 26 to early 28 phase before we open. Okay. All right, Miles, back to you.
Thanks, Brian. And we'll have time for some Q&A on process and questions and status, but we want to first jump straight into some design concepts so we can have a holistic conversation as we get through some of these designs. So on the next slide, what we're going to be taking a look at is what's happening on Colfax today. What are the improvements that you're going to be seeing out there right now? And Susan Wood with RTD is going to give us a little overview on that. Thanks, Susan.
Yeah, thank you, Miles. Yes, most of you have probably seen these improvements as they were under construction, or have noted what's out there today that wasn't there maybe a couple of years ago. These are improvements that certainly precede the bigger project that we're going to talk about tonight, the Colfax BRT project. And again, this has been underway for a couple of years, but it's been recently completed. It includes bus stop improvements, and it also includes operational improvements. Bus stop improvements include enhanced shelters at all the locations with benches and trash receptacles, with system traveler information at all the stops, security cameras, new lighting, schedule displays, and all designed to make the traveling experience better for those who are using the corridor. Operational improvements designed to provide a similar enhanced and better experience. Included in those are bus bulbs, which are at 11 stops. These are really just where the curbs are bumped out, so that as you board and alight from the bus, it's easier to do that with the curb extensions. And then things that help with operational improvements for the buses themselves, help them to be more efficient, or transit signal priority at signalized intersections, and queue bypass lanes at 3 intersections. And again, this just helps the bus to move more safely and more efficiently through traffic. There is a video that you can look at to see these improvements. It's on the slide that you see on the screen, and we would invite you to take a look.
Thank you so much, Susan. And I can testify that's a good video. So we'll look at dropping that in the chat, maybe Sid as well, so we can make it easy for folks to go grab that URL and check out what is happening in the corridor today. And now we're going to fast forward to what's going to be happening in the future. So on the next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about the public input and the feedback that we've received that have informed the changes to the last round of station designs that you've seen. And I'm going to flip it to my colleague, Abby Abel, to walk us through the key findings here.
Great, thanks, Miles. And so before we get into the sort of the meat of the discussion here and to some of the refined Colfax BRT station design themes, we wanted to share with you a little bit of the feedback that we've received from all of you to date. And so we had a survey online that was up for several months at the end of 2021. And we asked the question, which of the high-level design themes did you like the most? And if for those of you that have participated in the past, the 3 themes were rays of light, rewind, and playful landmarks. And hopefully those mean something to all of you on the call. And so what we wanted to share here is that rays of light, while there was preference in light and really appeal amongst all of the options, rays of light really was the leader. So of 240 survey responses, 107 of you preferred rays of light. And so that's the first question. And then we just wanted to share with you a couple of the really substantive themes that you all shared with us. What did you want to see in the station designs as the team began to refine them? And so if we go to the next slide, I simply just want to share with you a visual of the tool that we had online and all of the great comments that all of you provided. So we received 175 design comments. This shows you essentially the 3 design themes, and you had the opportunity to really share what you liked, where you had questions, where you thought things needed to be enhanced. And so we don't need to go into this in detail, but just wanted to share again, thank you, and acknowledge all of the great feedback that we received. On the next couple of slides, we summarized some of the themes and wanted to share with you again what we heard, because hopefully you'll see a lot of these themes reflected in the refined station designs that Kevin and the team will share with you following this piece. So I'll hit on these very quickly. Your desire to prioritize personal safety was loud and clear. So this came through really in lighting in particular, and in the need for good and thoughtful lighting, walls for protection, both from traffic and also from some of to serve as sort of splash guards. Also a big theme in terms of personal safety on transparency and transparency of materials, the ability to see through in all directions. Another big focus was on the, if we can just move to the former slide, yeah, thanks, was on the adequate protection from weather. And so you acknowledged how important it is, regardless of weather, whether it's heat, wind, rain, or snow, this sort of that need for protection, as well as protection from splash guarding, as I mentioned, from vehicles, was a top priority. You tended to prefer the open concept designs, both in terms of safety, but also passenger flow and flow of movement, and also the consistent placement of platform elements. So with regard to ticket vending machines, trash receptacles, and so forth. So particularly for those who have difficulty seeing, knowing that these elements are consistent across the platforms was a priority. And then finally, thinking about those in particular where noise, who are sensitive to noise, it can be a particular noisy corridor. So thinking about the use of materials to absorb some of that traffic noise. And again, this emphasis on transparent materials to aid visibility was a top priority. So I'll hit on quickly a few more on the next slide, and then we can move into the exciting, one of the exciting pieces of the presentation. You talked a lot about customizing the station. So there, a big theme was, while consistency was really important to you, also wanting to see some of that local color from across the communities represented in the station designs, both in terms of sort of use of public art and perhaps color. The need to integrate sustainable elements, whether that's solar or just the use of trees and green infrastructure for both health, air quality, aesthetics, and really being thoughtful about the waste facilities at the platform themselves. Clear emphasis on access to key rider information, whether that is bus ETAs, real-time information, and also acknowledging that visual information is important. Audible and tactile options may also be important, particularly for those where visual is not particularly useful. And then finally, just a desire to see this project happen. Really excited. I think that came through loud and clear. Would love to see this materialize as soon as possible. So hopefully that's helpful, and want to just kick it over to Kevin to share how some of this input has been integrated into the refined station designed concepts. So Kevin, I will kick it over your way.
Okay, thanks so much. I guess we can go to the next slide, please. So this is actually just an early view that kind of frames some of the issues. But what we'll be looking at tonight is we've taken, I think we shared with you previously, sort of 6 studies, 2 for each of the themes. So once there was a clear preference for the rays of light theme, we've taken those and we've developed 2 variations. for those two studies that we had previously. And we've been advancing that kind of further along, working with the structural engineers, working with the civil engineers, working with electrical engineers on lighting, all sorts of things. Kind of just making things more real as we advance the designs. But I do want to stress too, they're still very much in process. That's why we're showing you kind of the 4 variations today as a way to continue to elicit discussion and elicit questions and get more comments. But we have been listening very carefully over the last, 8 or 9 months now? And, we've had a lot of great comments. And so the input that Abby just reviewed with everyone, we're really kind of baking into this design. So as we go through them, we'll share them with you. We're still kind of working through conceptual issues. So we haven't got down to some of the issues about variability, where we might incorporate art or branding, some of the color issues, landscaping, where's it going to go? I think those things will come once we actually pick one of these and start to go forward with it. Those things will get incorporated. But I think we've got 4 solid kind of ideas. The intention of this view actually, and it's still kind of in process. We don't have context in all the buildings and things, but it shows you the overall relationship of 2 stations, and that they're very much a part of the kind of urban corridor, the urban context. So when you're on those stations, they're almost paper thin with this kind of solution, but you're very much in the center of the city. And as you'll see when we move into them, there's a lot of transparency in a few of these options that really ensures that if you're on the platform, you can see the shops around you, or if you're on the sidewalk, you can see people and activity on the platform. So it really kind of connects those things visually. Okay, next. So we have the 2 arched options here. I think we can just jump right into those. I mean, conceptually, the structure that's kind of holding up the canopy here is kind of radiating a little bit like rays of light. This is one of the options. Again, this structure really spans and becomes somewhat iconic for the BRT. The canopy itself is hung off of that. You can start to see it's providing really good weather protection from above. We've got a continuous splash guard that runs all the way along the back edge of the platforms. So wherever you are, you're protected from any kind of splashing. And that splash guard is about 42 inches, but that's also raised 14 inches. If you recall, the platforms are raised 14 inches. You're loading up onto the platform with a very shallow slope at one end, and then you transfer onto the buses. But if you're waiting there, you're well protected. And then underneath the canopy itself, we've got rain and wind screens all along the back edge. In this couple of solutions that we'll look at, they're glass, so they're very transparent. Next. Kind of that dusk view. Again, the transparency that you can see here. We're looking at some ideas about how to light that canopy. Good lighting is usually about lighting the surfaces. So we're split down on the ground so you can see it and be seen. This is looking back across the intersection with the 2 stations kind of talking to one another. Almost continuous benches along the back edge there. We've broken that up to allow for ADA seating or people who may want to stand. But you can see there's a really good rain screen across there, and then wind screens that are perpendicular to that back wall. The view from kind of the back edge, again, a lot of transparency here. I think that's one thing that we have heard from the small business owners is, when people are on the platforms, they'd like those people to be able to see their storefronts, go over there and support the local retail. A view straight on, we're looking at some ideas about where to incorporate signage. So this one actually has the street name on the canopy itself. So as you walk up into the station, you'll kind of see that as a surprising little element. Working maps and some of the wayfinding into the windscreens as well. Next option. So this is a variation then. This is sort of a unique kind of asymmetrical arch. As you'll see as we move around it. The other arch was symmetrical. Looking at kind of a different lighting option here where the lighting's perpendicular on the canopies. looking back across. That view from the back, a different section that we're studying on the arch from a structural standpoint. This one also started to kind of look at maybe the lighting being built into these fins as opposed to more of a typical kind of street light. This has a little bit of reflection on it, but that back wall is in fact glass. We've even looked at maybe pulling down the height of the solid splash guard to open it up a little bit. The canopy comes off of this asymmetrical arch. The asymmetrical arch has a little bit of movement built into it. You know, it's sort of appropriate for a bus rapid transit project. Next. And then we move on to what we're calling kind of the folded plate options. These were a little bit lower in scale, highly modular to the extent that you could really set these up as one long kind of canopy or a series of shorter canopies. Again, we've opened up the back of these to be fairly transparent. Next slide, kind of that dusk view. You know, we're thinking of kind of maybe lighting the edge on this and again, washing that ceiling surface. And then, you know, one of the great bits of feedback we got was the concern for kind of acoustical quietness in these. And so we're looking at ways to take that ceiling canopy and kind of absorb ambient noise. So people can hear buses coming or hear announcements that may be being made. Kind of a close-up view of that. It's a very integrated solution. It's kind of a structural, there's a structural element that comes up in the canopy itself, as well as the windscreens are kind of hung off of that. Looking straight on. This also is fairly dynamic solution where it's actually sort of angled to one direction. So it's got some movement built into it. I mean, you can almost kind of imagine, you know, if you blinked and a bus was moving by, kind of look like that. And then our second folded option is a little more straightforward, kind of a simple structure. Again, the plates are hung off the inside. Provides really good weather protection. Signage could be built into those vertical surfaces. Good sense of modularity, kind of building some dynamic kind of movement in with how we might do patterning in those back walls, whether it's all glass or some steel with the glass in it. Still kind of studying a lot of those things, but we've tried to take these kind of another step over those early studies that we shared with you. View from the sidewalk and that view straight on. You know, maybe some super graphics getting built in. And this kind of larger signs really work at the scale. So people who are driving down the street or riding the bus down the street can really kind of, it's almost like announcing the scale of that kind of sign for them. So that's kind of the summary. You know, again, we've taken the couple of studies and we've advanced them. As well as try to provide some variation, but we're still looking at a lot of things. You know, a lot of the, as I said, a lot of the really great comments we got about visibility, lighting, that sense of safety, and that sense of you know, protection from the weather. We've really tried to work those things in, and as we continue to go forward, we'll be looking at, you know, issues of sustainability. We're still thinking that PV will probably make a lot of sense. On the canopies for any of these options. We'll start to look at color as it relates to branding and kind of working art and some of those other variables in. So that's where we're at today.
Kevin, thank you so much for the really thorough overview. And we've got a polling question coming up that we're going to ask which one of these designs that you prefer. But before we get there, we want to get some more qualitative discussion going around these and also make sure we have a chance to address any questions on overarching project status or timeline or process. So Abby, I'm sure we've gotten some activity in the chat. How are we looking?
So Miles, we have quite a few questions about the project itself, as well as a number of questions about the design. So would you prefer to sort of address the project ones first?
Yeah, let's hit on a couple big of the overarching questions to make sure we don't go too far down the road before we address some of the project process questions.
Okay, great. So there were a couple of questions that really related to slide 15. And I think there's questions about, it shows painted lines between traffic lanes. So wanted to really understand how the traffic lanes will be separated and also whether there will be any barriers between the lanes. So we may need to go back to slide 15 for reference. And just generally, sort of the plan to reduce traffic lanes down to one and how that'll affect street parking.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one we'll get into in the portion of the presentation tonight where we're looking at the methodology and approach to modeling traffic and parking. But it's important to make sure we're looking at this diagram we've got here and everyone understands generally how things will work. And Brian Pinkerton, I'm thinking you're probably, with Phil's help, potentially gonna be best suited to address this one. One thing I will say to give Brian a chance to come online is that what we're looking at here is an intersection design, obviously with the station. So you will not see parking because this is a station area. So you do have your bus only lanes with the red painted indicators by the crosswalks up towards the front of that intersection. And then you have the single traffic lanes in each direction through the intersection. But Brian and Phil, I'm sure you can do a better job of describing some of the nuance.
And Miles, could you restate the question one more time?
Yeah, and Abby, maybe I think it's more fluent coming from you.
Yep. So just be really direct, Brian. So is it in fact painted lines between the traffic lanes? And will there, and if not, will there be barriers between the lanes?
It would be painted lines between the lanes, and part of the reason for that is a couple things. First of all, in terms of snow removal for maintenance activities, we got to be real careful anywhere we put any kind of vertical barrier, even a curb or something, because it can make snow removal much more difficult. And then if there was any kind of an incident on the road, you know, a car crash or something that we had to divert around, again, any kind of vertical barrier makes it very, very difficult to do that. So it is a painted barrier between the lanes, but at the speed limits that Colfax is regulated to, that's a very safe and sufficient divider.
One other quick follow-up, Brian, to that. So just the impact, and this visual may not tell the whole story, but the impact of reducing traffic down to one lane in each direction, how does that impact the parking situation?
We're still working on that, and we'll be bringing more back to the public. We are in the midst of completing our traffic modeling, and also we have been working on sort of a traffic evaluation for the corridor as part of that overall traffic modeling. We're not quite there yet, but we expect in the next month or so to have some predictions about how both the traffic mobility and the parking would work, and bring back ideas in terms of what we'd do in different locations.
Thanks, Brian. And I think that's a great setup for the discussion we'll have later tonight too. So Abby, any other big picture questions we should resolve before we get into the station design?
Yep, two other quick questions. So a question around the time saving. So thinking about from sort of point to point relative to the 15L today, what will the time savings be of the BRT? And then the next question, I'll hit it right off the bat. Is the city considering electric buses for the corridor?
Great questions. And Brian, I'll defer to you on the details for our travel time savings for transit.
Phil, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on that one, and then I can handle about the electric buses.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. We are anticipating a travel time savings of 10 to 15 minutes per trip in each direction with the BRT dedicated lanes.
And Phil, is that compared to the travel time today for the 15 and 15L?
Correct.
Perfect. And Brian, I know this is a big question for everybody on the vehicle type.
Yeah, so not determined yet. I mean, at this, if you were asking us what buses we're going to buy in 2022, they would likely be conventional diesel powered buses, but the technology is changing quickly. So by the time we're actually working with RTD to be procuring buses, we're certainly going to leave this option open. and RTD will consider electric buses as appropriate. It requires a different infrastructure. You have to have places where you can power those buses and different parts to store them and mechanics to work on them and all those kinds of, there's a lot of intricacies obviously to a decision like that. But in our conversations with RTD is certainly leaving an open mind about that. And when it comes time to actually be procuring the buses, we'll see where we're at that time with technology.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. So I think the summary for our community is it's a good question. We should keep asking it because things are moving quickly in that space. And Abby, I think it sounds like with those two questions, we should get back into our quadrant slide with the design. Any specific questions coming in for Kevin on the design front? Up with the mute.
My apologies. There's a couple of specific questions. And so one of them is give me 1 second. Is there one egress only for people with mobility devices, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay.
It's probably worth mentioning though that we're actually exceeding the ADA, and the sloped area that leads up to the platform is actually 1 in 20, which is less than ADA, which is 1 in 12. So it'll be a very gradual slope up. And since it's not a ramp, we don't have to have rails in the middle. It'll feel more open and welcoming.
And there's a couple of questions about materials. And so a question about what the material of the splash guard, if you know it at this point.
We're still evaluating materials. All these renderings show steel, but we'll also probably look at some concrete options as well from a maintenance standpoint.
Okay. And related, there's a question about sort of the sense that white and glass might create glare and reflection. So how are you thinking about, or how might you handle that in the design?
We're still looking at color and how it's going to relate to branding. So that's what I want to stress. These options are still in progress, and we don't know exactly what the color is going to be. At the same time, there's been a lot of desire to have lighting, and with current LED technology, lighting can be variable. So the canopies themselves, it might make sense to have some white if we worked lighting in that could, announce holidays or special events, or the Colfax marathon, those sorts of things. And then we'll probably be looking at some fritz on the glass, which is actually a ceramic, almost like a paint that's embedded in the glass that can cut down on some of that glare to provide a little bit of sun protection too.
And two more, Miles, if we have time. Two
Yeah,
more
let's
pretty
do
tactical.
2 more.
Okay.
Yep.
So one is just a question about the real-time arrival of buses. Is that still part of the plan? So Kevin, that may be directed to you or more at Phil.
I think it's 4.3 minutes, but I'll use my lifeline and go to Phil.
Kevin, you're correct. The expected headway, meaning the frequency of the buses, is 4.3 minutes in each direction all day long.
And Phil, I think the intent of that question, and apologies if I didn't ask it the right way, was whether the city will be providing real-time information arrival of buses.
Well, the intent is to have real-time information at stations where there are cross routes. In other words, for example, Broadway and Colorado and Monaco and Havana and Peoria out in Aurora. The reason being that we want to have real-time information at those locations so that people.
So it looks like the mute button got hit.
I'm sorry. So the point is to have the real-time information at locations where there are cross routes, so that if someone gets off of the BRT, they'll have a sense of how long do they have to wait for their transfer to the other route. But if you're just in the middle of the corridor where there are no cross routes, then there's really no need for real-time information, because again, even if you got there just after a bus left the station, you know that you only have about 4 minutes to wait for the next one.
So that's such a good point, and such a good question, and emphasizes one thing that I think we maybe don't talk about enough with this corridor and why it's such a good candidate for this type of project, because we're talking about the busiest transit corridor in RT system, running, you know, over 20,000 riders per day at its peak. So having that service is going to expand the capacity for those riders. We know there's a demand. And Abby, what's our final question?
Final question is, do the sloped entries connect to the crosswalks, Kevin?
Yes, they do. They connect directly. And we're looking at audible sort of enunciators at that location too, that'll help people navigating their way out to the center running platform.
And Abby, that was such a quick question. Do we have one more, or did we get through it all before we go polling?
We don't have anything related to design at this point, Miles.
Let's save it for the general Q&A that's coming up, and we'll launch our poll and get quantitative on this these options here. And I believe my colleague Sid is going to be launching a poll on this one that you should see momentarily. And the question is going to be, which of these design options do you prefer, A, B, C, or D? And you should be able to see your poll now and also be able to view the station concepts at the same time. And it looks like our early returns are, it's a horse race. Option B slightly favored, with A catching up close, and now they are tied. And we've got 69% of you reporting. So if you need just one more second, we'll count down. And once we hit the 75-80 mark, we'll close the poll. And these last few returns, option B did slightly notch ahead. And I think our participation is starting to drop off here. So Sid, if we could end the poll and share the results, what we're seeing here is option A coming in at 31%, option B coming in with 10 votes at 34%, being our winner by a hair. So there's a clear preference for some of these arced designs, and then option C and D coming in at 14 and 21% respectively. And so consistent with what we heard from our community task force representatives, but also option D surpassed option C, and that was one of the differences between now and some of your colleagues representing on the community task force. So some good input here. And again, there's been so many surveys that we have already asked the community about these concepts that we wanted to use this poll to really help do some refinement. So Kevin, I don't know if there's any takeaways here that are noteworthy to you.
I think, this is similar to what some of the bid business members expressed as well. I think that everyone likes the transparency and the openness that the arches are providing. It's that visibility, that sense of safety, that connection between standing on the platform and seeing the sidewalk and being seen by people on the sidewalk. It's all there. So that's great. Great input. Thank you.
Excellent. So moving on, you can go to the website after this meeting too, and you'll be able to see all these designs and share them with your friends and neighbors. Next topic for us, and to keep us on agenda, we're going to move straight into our branding and naming discussion. And I'm going to introduce Sean Lingle with Jones Worley, who's going to be walking us through this process. Sean.
Thanks, Miles. If you want to go to the next slide, I will show you the branding process that we've gone through. We have finished the first stage, which is the immersion process. It's researching and getting some initial input from various groups, including stakeholders, the community, community leaders, businesses, and that sort of thing. The second stage has been doing a lot of research, and then we're now in the phase where we're narrowing the names down, and we're going out to the community, going out to stakeholder groups and business groups to get feedback on the name. If you want to go to the next slide, go into a little detail. In addition to getting input, we've also developed some criteria. You start out with a bunch of names, and then how do you get it down to one? One way is establishing some criteria in the beginning up front about what would be a good name. And then at the back end, which we're doing right now, number 6 is soliciting input. In between that time, as I said, we did a lot of word research, we did a lot of brainstorming, and now we're in the narrowing down process. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Some of the words that we got from community stakeholders using to describe that they use to describe Colfax are on this page. We took all of these words into account when we came up with names. Obviously, these are not names, but they're words that give you a flavor for what the name should represent. Next slide, please. The criteria that I mentioned, there are a few things that we require, a few things that we wanted. Any name that we pick, we wanted to be simple and easy to pronounce for everybody. We wanted something that's recognizable and clearly understood. We didn't want an inside baseball name that a few people got and some people don't. We want a name that's going to resonate with riders, but also the wider community, even for people that don't ride. Short is ideal, but also something that's interesting and fun. This is a major project. This is the magnitude of this, the magnitude of the name should match the magnitude of the project. So we really wanted to come out with an exciting name that will make people want to ride the system and want to use this system. An important factor too is that very early on, RTD and the city decided that the name should be overarching. There are several BRT lines that are planned for the city in the future, and they didn't want to come up with a different name for every BRT line. It would get crazy after several years with so many lines, it gets confusing for the customer. So there would be an overarching name, and then it would be the Colfax line would be a line in the system, but the name would be for the entire bus rapid transit system. The thing that's really cool is because Colfax is first, you guys get an input into this, whereas the other lines, the name's already going to be selected by the time it gets to those neighborhoods. Some of the desired qualities that we're looking for is we want a name that appeals to Spanish speakers as well as English speakers. We'd like to embody a benefit of the BRT line. In particular, speed is a key feature of the BRT line, coming every 4.5 minutes and also cutting down on travel time because of those dedicated lanes. And also something that has significance locally, regionally, or some meaning locally or regionally is another desired feature. So if you want to go to the next slide, please. As I said, in the beginning, we came up with a wide variety of names. We've got it down to 4, and we want you guys to help us get it down to 1. We're looking for your input in picking what is the final. Next slide, please. So where we are right now, we have the top 4 are Lynx, Comet, Pronto, and Runner. And these were selected by the technical working group. Flyer has dropped off, and we'll go into the details on why that dropped off in a minute. But I wanted to just, excuse me, go to the next slide, please. Just get your feedback here. And then when we select the finalist name, the next step will be to start working on the logo. So that's where we are in the process. We're really excited about getting that final name so we can start working on some logos. Wanted to walk through the names themselves with you. If you want to go to the next slide, please. We're going to have a vote at the end. Excuse me. If you want to go to menti.com and put in this code, or you can simply take a picture of this QR code with your phone and it will go right to the page. And at the end, we'll have a vote, just like we did with the station design. And if you'd like to go to the next slide. So the first name that came up in the voting, as you saw earlier, is Lynx. And when we go through the naming process, we put it through a pretty rigorous process, and that's how we got eliminated some of the 40 names because they didn't make it through this process. We go through the definition, look at all the potential definitions of a word, not just the one that comes to mind when you first think about it. We also look at what the Spanish translation is. We refer to Urban Dictionary and make sure there aren't any popular nefarious names for the word, meanings for the word. We come up with a rationale, and then we look at how is the name used locally in the Denver area. Are there other organizations or businesses that have this in their name? in a perfect world, we would come up with a word that nobody else had used ever. But to do that, you'd have to invent a new word because there's not a word in the dictionary that people haven't used for something. So part of the input we seek from you is identifying a name that we feel like doesn't have too many confusing other uses in the community. For instance, Lynx is also Colorado University at Denver's club level sports mascot. Is that a conflict? Would that be confusing to people? That's things like that are what we seek your input on. Lynx, for instance, one of the things that we liked about it is also it's a play on words. In addition to being a beautiful animal that's being reintroduced to Colorado after being absent from the state for a while, it's also got that homonym where it symbolizes how the BRT line will link folks to jobs, to medical appointments, to shopping and things like that. And I also think it would be easily developed into a mascot. If you want to go to the next slide, please. Comet is another word that rose to the top in our process. It's got an easy translation into Spanish. There's a naming variation that it could stand for Colorado Metro or something similar. Comets are very fast, so it implies that speed. And there are a few local uses of the word comet. Probably most popular locally is for the last 20 years, East High students have called the 15 the vomit comet. So that's something interesting that came up in our research that we had no idea about. So that has knocked comet down a little bit in the rankings on some occasions, but again, we seek your input on whether you think that should impact whether we choose comet or not. The next name, please. Pronto is another word that rose to the top of the rankings. It means fast, which is a good descriptor for the BRT line. And there's no need to translate it into Spanish because it's already a Spanish word, so that's perfect. And there's very little local usage of the name. If you'd like to go to the next slide, please. Runner is the final finalist name, and we liked the fact that it signifies speed. We like the local tie with the Colfax Marathon. There are a few local uses, mainly related to running, a store, a magazine, trail runners group. There's also a runner liquor store. So there's a little bit of local usage, but hopefully nothing that's too overwhelming. And then the final name that we had considered is Flyer. And at first, this sounded like a great name. It made it through our process. But again, the reason that we're going out and seeking input is to find out, to eliminate words that may not work. And if you want to go to the next slide on Flyer, the thing that really hung us up on Flyer is there's already a Flatiron Flyer, which we thought made it a good idea. This could be the Metro Flyer, this could be the City Flyer, and it could be a companion to the Flatiron Flyer. However, the Flatiron Flyer is a totally different type of service than this new BRT line in the city is going to be. It comes every 15 to 30 minutes versus the city lines are going to come every 4.5 minutes. It's a completely different style of bus. It's a completely different style of station. So after further consideration, we thought that Flyer probably wouldn't be a very good name because it would be very confusing to people. So we wanted to open it up. If you want to go to the next slide, please, for discussion on the 4 names before we go to the vote. If anybody has comments or, what they like about the name or anything that you've thought of about why this would be a good name or why it would not be a good name. If you want to voice your opinion or have more discussion on it, please speak up now. Abby, do we get any questions?
We do, and I also see that Colleen has her hand up. So Colleen, if we're able to unmute Colleen, and Chichi, if you can, you'll be on deck here.
Hi, I like Comet I like the Colorado Metro thing about the comment, but I do agree with these high school kids. I know it's a very vomit. I've known it for years, and it's a reputation that the Colfax bus has. If we're cleaning up the Colfax bus and we're cleaning up the stations and everything, maybe that will go away. But I really like the comment idea best.
Excellent, thank you.
And Chi-Chi, if we can unmute Chi-Chi, or if you can unmute yourself. We'll go
Hi.
next.
Can we not simply just call it BART, like the San Francisco Bay Area Regional Transport? Can we not just call it BART? Is that not simple enough? I mean, I like links the best of all of them because I feel linking the communities together plays very well, and the Spanish translation is great because it's pronounced the same. But is it not just simply just call it BART since it's already BRT?
Gotcha, okay. That is an option. We did not look at acronyms. Yeah, I know in San Francisco, it's on the Bay Area Rapid Transit, Bay Area Regional Transit is what that stands for. That was not something that came to the top in our naming process. But I don't know, is that something, anybody else in the group have any thoughts on that?
Sean, I will just note that in the chat, the other option that was provided was DART, which I believe would stand for Denver Area Regional Transit.
Mm-hmm.
So just to mix it up a little bit.
Absolutely. There's also one in Dallas and one in Des Moines. This name DART as well. That's more so the name of the overall transit authority, however, not a specific BRT line.
Yeah, this is Susan from RTD. I would just add, I certainly wouldn't preclude that name from being used, but I think that it might present some level of confusion or certainly duplication to go with BART or DART.
Sean, I'll just jump in here to say too, we do have a poll coming up on this. You may have already mentioned it, but where we want to get some feedback and really focus our feedback on these specific names to make sure that we're channeling our energy towards the names that have been already vetted with the community and the whole very thorough process that you have lined out already.
Absolutely. Thanks, Miles.
Yeah, and there will be a follow-up survey available to folks as well, where we can open it up to some of the why and some of the other ideas. So we love the creativity from our community.
Excellent. Do we want to ask Corky? I see there's a hand up there before we go into the voting.
Oh, Miles, looks like you're muted.
Yep, I think we should. Yeah, Corky, you got your hand up?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just going to say I like links and comments. And I was going to say, like, if anything, the fact that the comment was used previously in an undesirable way for Colfax, to me, it only raises that as a better option because of that. But that's my opinion.
Well, and
Thank
Corky,
you.
that is a thought that we've heard is it's a chance to reclaim that. But we, as Sean said, want to make sure that the community acknowledges the history there as well. So that's great feedback. Thank you so much. And I saw maybe one other hand flash up, but I don't see it anymore. So Abby, maybe there's some questions in the chat that we want to tackle.
There are. So one question, whether, Sean, there was any consideration given to indigenous names or words associated with the stewards of Denver land in the process?
That was not, based on our criteria, we wanted something that was short, that was easy to pronounce, and that also had, very easily identifiable, and also was easy to translate into Spanish. And so they were considered very early on in the process, but as we went through the criteria and the selection process, it got narrowed down so that we found that the shorter names, the simpler names, were the ones that rose to the top, that were more popular.
Great. And then I just acknowledge 2 comments. One, the runner, and Sean, you mentioned this a bit, runner has the negative connotation to someone running from authority. So just making that point from the group here, an acknowledgement that pronto also means early in Spanish. And again, I think you alluded to some of that Spanish translation, and that, and then just some other suggestions, but I think that addresses most of the questions here.
Okay. Well, thank you. Are we ready to go to the Mentimeter now?
Yeah, Sean, I think that's a great idea. And we did drop the code and the link in the chat too for everyone to grab. So hopefully you've had a chance to pull out your phone. You get a QR code here, and Sean, I'll cede the floor.
Okay. Thank you. And if you want to drop the share, we can share the Mentimeter so everybody can see the results. So it looks like we've had 14 people vote so far, and links and comment are sort of neck and neck right now. We got 17 now. How many do we have vote for the station design? Was that 29, I think? Okay. So just giving you guys a little bit of time on that. Looks like links and comment are still the top. Pronto's coming in a close third. I think runner is falling off a little bit based on that, perhaps based on that comment about running from the law or running from bad things. That might be some negative connotations. We got 20 now. So we've got maybe 9 more people to vote potentially. Give you another maybe 30 seconds to get your vote in.
Sean, while we wait for the votes to come in, I wonder if we might want to, I think Colleen has her hand up again.
Okay.
Colleen, and maybe forgive me if your hand was already up. And
No, the link was on so fast, I can't vote because I was trying to take a picture and it went down. And so I haven't voted yet, and I sure want to vote. So I don't want you to put it down yet. Can you put the QR code back up?
Sure.
Absolutely. There you go, Colleen. Hopefully it's big enough. We'll leave it up here, and let us know while you have it. And I'm sure everyone else who's waiting to get their polling results in, thanks you for a little extra time.
All right. I don't shoot.
And if the QR code doesn't work, Colleen, you can always go to menti.com and type in the number here.
I got it.
Okay, very good.
Submit. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Miles, do you want to drop the QR code again? We can put the results back up. Thank you. All right, looks like we're at 28. Got 29 now. It's so tiny, I can barely see it.
It's 29.
Awesome. So we're there. So again, links, comment pronto, then runner. So thank you everybody for your input. Really appreciate it. Very helpful.
And Sean, is there any other slides or things you want to cover, commentary on this one, or should we keep on moving?
I would keep on moving. That's all that we were looking for today, was just to get some feedback on the names. Again, you know, with the comment, we wanted to see how people felt about that in light of, you know, some of the local usage, and of course links. We especially wanted some feedback on that, as well as the other 2 names. So really appreciate everybody taking their time and giving their input.
Excellent. Thanks. Thanks so much, Sean. And as I said, I'm sure a lot of the community is wondering where we go from here on the naming. There is going to be a survey to follow up from this poll that we'll launch and send out to all of the Colfax project email list. We'll put it on social media. It'll be on the project website at colfaxbrt.org. So there will be a couple more weeks to provide some feedback on this, and we'll take those results and bring it back and share them at our next meeting. And at our next meeting, we're also going to be unpacking one of the more important issues for this project to address. And that if we can bump a slide or two ahead, we're going to give you a sneak preview here tonight just to set the stage and seed the discussion for traffic and the parking analysis, understanding what the methodology, what the approach is for this critically important topic. And I know, Abby, I think we have a lot of questions in the chat already on some of the parking and traffic issues. So want to make sure we can give you an overview of what our process is going to look like as we dive into this important topic. And then we're saving plenty of time for Q&A here. So with that, I'm going to flip it to my colleague, Charlie Alexander with Baron Peers, to walk us through the traffic modeling and parking analysis.
Very good. Thanks, Miles. Go to the next slide here and I'll dive right in. Okay, my presentation this evening is going to be pretty brief, mostly, as Miles indicated, giving everyone here an idea of what you can expect from us on the traffic and parking side of things when we're in front of you at the next public meeting. So starting first with the traffic analysis, I'll talk through the questions that we're really trying to answer with our analysis and then the approach for how we're doing that. In terms of the questions we're trying to answer, we're really trying to understand how people move through the study area, both with and without the Colfax BRT project. And when I say the study area, we're looking all the way down to 13th Avenue and then all the way up to 17th or 18th Avenue, depending on whether in the west part of the corridor where 18th Avenue is the furthest north, or 17th Avenue in points east on the corridor, all the way from downtown Denver to I-225. As we're doing that, we're aiming to understand what improvements on some of those parallel streets might be necessary to make sure that we can provide mobility for all people trying to travel through the study area. We're answering these questions using a fairly sophisticated tool that we use in the traffic industry called a traffic simulation. For those of you who played SimCity as a video game, think of it as a very sophisticated, complex SimCity that deals specifically with traffic. It actually simulates the movement of individual vehicles, individual buses, and individual pedestrians and bicyclists. We're studying over 125 intersections in the study area that have traffic signals or traffic lights. And we're studying both sort of a near-term condition, if the Colfax BRT was built now compared to a condition 20 years from now in 2040. As we do that, we're going to be measuring a variety of things, such as how many people we're moving through the area, both without and with the project, the travel time and delay, both for people moving in vehicles as well as moving in buses, and then any potential diversion that we might see resulting from the project from Colfax to parallel streets. The image on this slide is just an image of our traffic model. By our standards, this is a very large and quite extensive model. It takes somewhere in the ballpark of 4 or 5 hours to run a simulation. So it's fairly significant. The last thing that I'll mention on this slide is that we're very focused on both the rush hour in the morning as well as the rush hour in the evening as well. Next slide, please. Separate topic here, how are we looking at curbside and parking analysis? Handful of questions we want to answer here. We want to understand how the actual regulation of the curb can be optimized to serve demand for different users in the area. What changes to the on-street parking or curbside regulation may be necessary to serve that demand. And then where we're going to need to do additional implementation planning as a part of final design. The work that we're doing at this phase is still, I don't want to say it's high level, but it's a little bit in the middle. We're not getting to the detail of, move this sign from here to there, change this regulation of this space from X to Y. We're speaking more categorically at the phase of work that we're doing currently. Our approach on this is to compare the existing supply of on-street parking on Colfax to the demand for parking on Colfax Avenue. So we're looking both on Colfax itself, as well as some of the side streets that intersect Colfax in the study area. To do that, we actually go and do different demand runs throughout the day. We've focused our analyses on sort of a weekday midday condition. We did a Wednesday midday for that, a Friday evening, as well as a Saturday midday. All of this results wise on the traffic side, we're aiming to have that wrapped up in late winter, early spring. On the curbside and parking front, late winter. It's a little bit ahead of the traffic at this point. So those are the questions we're trying to answer with these analyses and our approaches to them. Miles, I can't remember if you want to do questions now or if you want to let Jane do her piece first and then wrap up with questions.
Yeah, let's take a peek at the next slide and see what we've got here. I think we can move. Yeah, let's bump one back and do questions here, and then we'll get to Joanne. So knowing that there's a bunch of questions out there on traffic specifically, we'll make sure that we hold some time for Joanne to go through a very important topic on the small business resources available. But I know Barbara has had her hand up for a while, and Barbara, I'm sure it's tired, so let's unmute and get your question out there. Thank you.
Sorry, I was going to say on the names that I didn't vote because I didn't like any of the names, and maybe that's why a lot of the other people didn't vote. I would much prefer something that explains what it is. So BRT, Bus Rapid Transit, tells you what it is. Lynx or Comet or Runner or Pronto don't give you any idea if you're talking about a Broadway show or a movie or who knows what it is.
Barbara, that's a very good point, and I see Chi-Chi is seconding, and you know, it will always be a bus rapid transit project, and I think as Sean mentioned in her presentation on the naming convention, there are other BRT projects coming in Denver, so there will always be BRT as part of the terminology and the vernacular we use to describe this project, absolutely. And Sean, I'm sure you have thoughts.
Yeah. Calling it BRT would be almost a generic name because that is the name. What it is, it would be like, you know, coming out with a new model of car and calling it car. It tells you what it is, but it doesn't give you any sort of feeling. So when we look through the process, you know, we were specifically told, for instance, that we shouldn't name it Rapid, and Rapid shouldn't be in the name. Which would knock out BRT right from the beginning. But also we were no acronyms were selected in our naming process either. So it was just, you know, it was part of the process. We start out with some similar names, but when we're given criteria, that's how we judge the list of names that we have, is we look at the criteria that we were given initially. And if it doesn't meet the criteria, then the name falls off. And so that's why names like that were not in the final, if that helps the explanation at all.
Thanks for the context, Sean. And there will be that survey coming out too, where we do have an open-ended component, so we can get just all the qualitative feedback as we go through. And Chi-Chi, I see you've got your hand up as well.
Yes, hi. As a small business owner who has properties right off of Colfax, I'm concerned with the model that's on slide 15 regarding the reduction of traffic lanes down to just one and the removal of metered parking for a lot of the storefront businesses who rely on metered parking for their clients who don't have access to off-street parking or side street parking. How are you guys planning on dealing with that in terms of connectivity with the small businesses and the availability to their clients, especially considering if you remove meter parking from Colfax, you are then increasing side street parking and side street traffic?
Chi-Chi, that's a great question and a topic we're going to be getting into in detail as some of those results Charlie walked us through are coming in, and we start to examine and share those. What I should say, just as a point of clarification, the image we looked at slide 15, because it was a station area, all metered parking was removed. But along the corridor, there is still going to be metered parking. And so, Charlie, I don't know if you want to just emphasize the approach you're taking to analyzing the parking and how it will change.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I want to hit the first concern just about the traffic levels as well. But starting first with the parking miles, yeah, this is exactly what we're aiming to get a better grip on over the next couple months. As Miles indicated, there will still be on-street parking on Colfax for most of the corridor's length. There will be a reduction, particularly near station areas, as Miles indicated. So we're looking to understand what are those locations where once the project's in, where there just will not be enough on Colfax, looking to understand whether or not there is some capacity on the side streets to sort of absorb where we do see some loss on Colfax. And beyond that, looking at other strategies to try to make it such that there is a place to park conveniently, on an area by area basis, and make sure that people trying to access the corridor in the area for various purposes, can find a place to park. So we'll have more specifics on what those regulatory changes might be when we come back here. Obviously, things like metered parking, things like time limits, et cetera, are those sorts of regulations that sort of ensure or increase the likelihood of availability. But we'll just need to come back to you at our next meeting to give you more details on what we recommend. I just want to say really quickly on the traffic question and how many people move through the study area. It's really easy to look at this project as taking Colfax from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. That's certainly, I think, one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it, if you look all the way from 13th to 18th, there's somewhere in the ballpark of 15 travel lanes in each direction, providing mobility through the area. So another way of thinking about this question is trying to understand, are we talking about 4 to 2, or are we talking about 15 to 13 in terms of, the ability of the streets in the area to move people through, whether they're trying to move through the area or trying to access a destination in the area.
Charlie, I think that's such a good point to put it in the broader context, and also thinking about the service that we see riding the Colfax bus service today. It's the busiest corridor in RTD system, and we know that corridor is reaching capacity. So we've got some great data, Chi-Chi, that we can share with you on the economic benefits of increasing the number of people that you can move through the same amount of space, and some of the sales tax and the economic development activity and benefits that have resulted in other cities, like the BART that you mentioned. So you're fortunate on Colfax to have many very well organized business improvement districts. So I would also encourage you to talk to your bids, and they've got a lot of good information to share with you as well. But more information will be forthcoming as we move through the traffic analysis. And Miles.
Yeah, thanks again. I'm the other Miles. So quickly, Charlie, as we discussed at the last meeting, did you find out if the zoning changes that the plan, the small area plan that was completed are within those models, as well as you were going to look into Denver in that plan is proposing a bike lane on 13th. And I think you basically said only projects that are funded will be in that traffic modeling. And I'm not sure if the city, has funded or even decided what they're going to do, but they do have 14th with a bike lane. So how will that be accommodated in these calculations?
Yeah, thanks, Miles, for bringing that back. No conclusive answers on those questions yet. I can commit to get those back to you for the next round of public and stakeholder meetings. Just to sort of reiterate the question for the benefit of the group here to understand what we're looking at. Firstly, on the growth in the area, as we look into understanding traffic patterns by 2040, we want to make sure that we're accounting for changes in population, changes in employment between now and the future, so that we're planning for the growth that's going to happen. We are in communication with the Denver Regional Council of Governments, Dr. Cog, as to what are the assumptions in their model, and they're reviewing our model files right now. So we're waiting to hear back from them for the conclusive answer on the growth question. And then the second point you raised, Miles, is about, what about other projects in the study area and how those might affect mobility. So Yes, for the purposes of our study, we do need to assume projects that have funding. And we're working with the city to make sure we get the right ones assumed for our analysis. Just a little bit of background on the reason for that. We're going after a competitive grant funding source for this through the Federal Transit Authority. And they want to make sure that we're not assuming a bunch of pie in the sky ideas that don't have funding attached to them, because it can potentially make the project look different compared to other projects around the country. So we just want to make sure that we're playing by the same rules that FTA is asking us to play by as we do that. So I can definitely answer those conclusively at the next one, but unfortunately no answer tonight.
Thanks, Charlie, and Miles, great questions. And this is just the beginning of our conversation on this topic, and we're sure to be, as Charlie had mentioned, having a lot of more in-depth discussion on the complexities of this issue. Abby, do we have any other hands up or questions from the chat?
I have a couple of questions from the chat. And so, Charlie, I don't know if your response just addressed this question, but sort of just a general question around how bike lanes, or sort of how the modeling is considering bike lanes or areas for scooters, acknowledging the fact that oftentimes cyclists or those using scooters use the sidewalks along Colfax. And so just curious how your process will consider that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long history of the conversation of biking and Colfax Avenue, and that probably dates back, 10 years plus through some of the early Colfax Connections work and sort of identifying, what's the priority for Colfax? Is it transit? Is it bikes? I can't speak to the specific conversations there, but I think, over time, the decision has been made to prioritize Colfax for transit movement. And in doing so, to double down on investments in parallel streets to upgrade those streets for bike facilities. So just glancing really quickly at the map on the city's Denver Moves Bikes page, I think that there are facilities proposed at least for 12th Avenue, 14th Avenue, 16th Avenue, and 20th and 21st to provide sort of east-west bicycling mobility through this area. So as I mentioned before, we're working to understand the extent to which we should be assuming those are in place in a similar timeline to our project and have funding to be in place in that time. There's other parallel efforts happening at the city now through their community transportation network program, and in many cases, I think, to build a lot of those facilities. And when it comes to, how does that help Colfax? Obviously, the through movement helps, but we're also, wanting to take a look at what we can do for the streets that are going to connect people from those parallel facilities to Colfax Avenue to sort of provide that connection so people can be biking to the destinations on Colfax as well. So it's certainly, when we say Colfax BRT, it implies just the corridor, but when we talk about the design exercise for this, it definitely branches a little bit off corridor as well to try to make it work as a system.
Awesome, Charlie. Thank you. And I know David's got his hands up, and I just got a question in the chat from Jacqueline and said, if we can go back to slide 60, I know this is an important question that's on a lot of people's minds, and I'm sure Abby's seen in the chat as well. And it's really on the second bullet under key questions for the analysis and the concern about how do we manage diversion traffic on parallel streets, and what tools do we have in our toolbox that we'll be looking at for traffic calming on 12th through 18th.
Yeah, great question. How do we manage it? Well, the first question that we're trying to answer is, how likely is it? So, if based on the work we're doing, I think we'll get a much better handle of what likelihood we think we're going to see traffic potentially diverting to some of the other streets. Just a few of the strategies that I can say we're definitely thinking about. The city's generally avoided adding widening roads to accommodate additional capacity, just recognizing that it often, it typically induces more demand for driving than existed before. But there are things that we can explore in terms of signal timing. How is the signal timing prioritized for east-west versus north-south streets, for instance? That has a big effect on how these streets operate in the study area. Another thing that we can likely also look at is turn lanes at intersections. Turn lanes are in a lot of cases where people are incurring a lot of delay in the corridor, or also, or when turning, people are often, incurring delay, or also people trying to turn that block through moving vehicles and make it difficult to get through, right? So there are times where we can add turn lanes at key intersections where that is maybe becoming problematic to alleviate some of those concerns. But along with a lot of this analysis, I think we'll have a much better grip of what specifically we might be proposing when we come back in our next meeting.
Thanks, Charlie. And I hope that answered a lot of the questions for the folks who are thinking about that important issue. We know it's a big one on the minds of the community, and this conversation is just beginning as we begin to better understand, like Charlie said, how likely some of these parallel street conditions could become. Then we'll know what tools we'll have to address them. And David, thanks for your patience. And I know you've had your hand up. What's your question?
Well, a couple of things. One, in terms of how do you ensure the frequency and such when you have limited, or your friction-free travel west of Yosemite, but you're going to have friction playing in traffic east of Yosemite. That's going to cause a problem. You just started talking about the left-hand turns on and off. I assume most of those will be just at key intersections anymore on Colfax. And then when you talk about the parallel streets, saying you're taking out 2 lanes, but across 10 streets. Colfax is a commercial thoroughfare, and the others are all residential.
Yeah, those are great questions, good points. I might ask someone else to weigh in on the frequency question. If not, I can come back to it at the end. On the parallel streets, some of the work we're doing right now is an analysis of the origins and destinations of people driving on those different streets. So, where are people beginning their trips, generally speaking? Where are people ending their trips? We're not getting that information like door to door. We're sort of getting it aggregated neighborhood to neighborhood. And generally seeking to answer the question, are those other streets functioning differently in terms of how people are using them from Colfax Avenue? Yes, Colfax is obviously a commercial street. The others are more mixed in terms of whether they're going through residential areas or whether they're going through more commercial districts on those corridors. But nonetheless, we're looking to understand whether or not they're actually being used differently by people in terms of how they're traveling, because I think that weighs a lot on the question of whether or not the parallel streets are sort of viable alternatives for people. Does anyone want to weigh in on the frequency question other than me?
Charlie, I think you should definitely throw in a lifeline maybe to Phil here quickly on frequency.
Sounds good.
And then I want to make sure we give Joanne some time here at the end of the presentation. So why don't we let Phil weigh in on frequency, and then listen to any final thoughts from our project manager, Brian, and we'll get to the DOTI component.
Sorry, David, would you mind asking the question again about frequency? I didn't quite catch it.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point of taking out lanes is to ensure frictionless travel and, consistent, speedier travel. When you transfer to the side running in Aurora, you're playing in traffic, you're going to have friction there. So I don't know how you can keep the whole system moving smoothly.
Oh, okay. Now I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah, we're absolutely expecting the greatest improvement in transit travel time in the Denver segment where the buses are operating in dedicated lanes. And you recall that it's not just the 5.5 miles between Yosemite and Broadway, the Civic Center area, but also into downtown to Denver Union Station using 15th and 17th and the dedicated bus lanes on those streets as well. So consider, well, what is it, 72% of the entire corridor the buses will be operating in dedicated lanes. And so that's where we do expect far less friction with the adjacent traffic and much better travel times. In Aurora, we don't really expect the travel times to be much worse than they are today with the 15L, for example, the limited stops. So in that sense, overall, the corridor definitely is going to be improved. Keep in mind too, that we do have these very frequent buses because we're trying to maximize the amount of person trip throughput, not just cars, but person trips. And so we're increasing the overall capacity of the corridor by having this much better, much faster, much more reliable bus service in addition to the remaining traffic lanes.
Thanks, Phil. And we're going to be able to stick around a little bit after 7 here for any remaining questions. I know Javier and Miles, you've got your hands up, and I do want to make sure, because we're 5 minutes to 7, that we end on time and give Joanne on the next slide, Sid, a few minutes to just introduce some of the resources that are going to be available to our small businesses and the folks like Chi-Chi mentioned earlier during this process. So Joanne, thank you for your patience, and let's flip it to you.
Absolutely. I used to work in transportation. I used to work with Phil Hoffman, so I love hearing all this stuff. Anyway, I'm Joanne Greek, the Small Business Program Manager at DEDO, Denver Economic Development and Opportunity. And if you have any questions or comments about this, here's my email, joanne.greek@denvergov.org. Next slide, please. We provide businesses with a detailed toolkit that has resources about staying in touch with your customers, sharing alternative routes and access points, doors, keeping tidy, maintaining your staff and inventory levels, staying positive, which is very important, exploring new markets, and staying informed. So this is how we work with businesses when there may be impacts from construction. So we help them prepare. Next slide, please. We also ask businesses to complete a self-assessment tool so they can identify any special circumstances regarding their business operations that can relate to some of the things that I have listed here. So that gives a business an opportunity to maybe put into place a short-term business plan so they can thrive and operate during the construction. Next slide, please. And then with every project, it's very different across the city, but typically with every project, construction project, there are opportunities to do some general marketing, to do some wayfinding, a lot of good, bright, visible signage so your customers know how to get to your doorstep. And there's even opportunities for celebrating those milestones that I think everyone was kind of talking about earlier. So just to let you know that we are here as a resource. We've done this before with many businesses for many construction projects across the city, Central 70 Brighton Boulevard, and we are here to be a resource to businesses that would like some extra assistance preparing for construction. So thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. And we do have some more time built in for some Q&A, but because we are 2 minutes to 7, I want to respect everybody's time. And if folks do want to stay on and ask additional questions, we'll be here for that. So Sid, if we could pop down to our last slide on where we go from here. I want to let folks read this, but also flip it to our project leadership team, Brian Pinkerton, and I think I saw David Krupsinger's camera flash on for a minute just to deliver some final thoughts before we head into some more Q&A, I'm sure, on the important issue of traffic. Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Miles. I know the whole traffic impact evaluation is very, very important to people. It's a very important topic. We have committed from the very beginning of this to do our best professional job at projecting what we think the traffic is going to be and how the bus is going to perform and where the cars will go and et cetera. And we're going to share all that with you. So you're going to see what we see, and then we can have the conversation. I know there's a lot of concern tonight, but we're going to have some results where we can really kind of start talking turkey here before too long. I do want to balance the discussion of the concern with traffic with kind of the other side of that story, the rest of that story, and it builds on what Phil was talking about in terms of people moving. You know, we as a city are extremely interested in improving the performance of transit, and this project is going to uncongest the bus that is now stuck in congested traffic and help with that that moving of the people in the corridor. At the same time, I think helping create an environment for this part of the city that enhances the whole Colfax corridor from a people placemaking perspective. So I want to keep that as part of the discussion too. I mean, there are going to be some impacts to traffic and to parking, there's no doubt. We're going to work as hard as we can to mitigate those, but let's not lose sight of the fact that we're going to have a tremendous benefit of transit and total person moving capacity, and the quality of that placemaking along Colfax as part of that. And it is our hope and our professional belief that as we attract people out of their cars into this higher performing transit system, that we will have fewer cars to deal with. That's not to say we're not going to have negative traffic impacts, but we do think this is part of a movement to also just reduce the total amount of cars that are out there on the road. So thank you, and we'll just keep all those things in mind as we move this conversation forward as we start to get results.
Brian, that's extremely helpful perspective. Thank you so much for that. Before we open it up to some Q&A, David, I don't know if I thought I saw your camera flash on, so I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you have any other final thoughts, I think now would be a good time.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a brief thank you for everyone's eyes, ears, hearts, and minds on this project. We really appreciate all the input. And like Miles said, we'll stick around for a few additional questions. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, team. So Miles, and I think Gabe has joined you with your hand up. Because we've already heard from Miles, I'm sure his virtual hand is getting tired, but let's hear from Gabe first, just to make sure we hear from everybody, as many people as possible tonight. Gabe.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, number one, I've been looking forward to this project as someone who lives near Colfax in Colorado and works downtown for years. So I'm excited to see the progress that's being made. I'm kind of just curious in terms of like ballpark, how many more people can be moved through more frequent buses that have their own right of way. Just what we're talking about in terms of a factor or ballpark, you know, percentage more people that can move through the corridor.
That's a fantastic question, Gabe. And it's not, like you said, it's not just on the travel time for existing riders, but how many more riders can also go that fast and save that much time. And Phil, I think you probably have the best handle on some of our forecasting.
Well, I wish I could give you more details, but unfortunately the forecasting isn't quite in place yet. But we are expecting, Gabe, to your question, we're expecting approximately a 35 to 40% increase in transit ridership with this project.
That's a pretty substantial number. And you know, Gabe, I think one of the benefits too with the bus system is if that enhanced capacity isn't enough, you can add more buses and more frequency, and the frequency we're talking about is pretty substantial, so there is going to be a really increased capacity right off the bat. So I hope that answers your question. Awesome, thanks, Gabe. And Javier, it's good to see your hand back up. Thanks for sticking with us. And Javier, looks like you're unmuted, but we don't have your audio yet. And Javier, you can drop a comment in the chat to Abby as well, or to me if your audio is not working. In the meantime, why don't we circle back to Miles?
Hi, thanks. Just a few quick follow-ups. I was wondering, this is more for Charlie. It sounds like it's calculating vehicles moving, but again, the East Central plan is the zoning has been changed, and they're looking at larger buildings, more dense development along the corridor. So I guess the question is, for maintenance vehicles, how is that being accounted for? We're talking larger buildings, trash trucks, maybe more curb usage. Is that in the calculations? And then just more of a final statement that I think would be helpful for us trying to follow the project. Can you guys clearly state when you change some of the parameters? I think it would be helpful for us to understand. I mean, I noticed there were lanes painted in the BRT stations, but we were told in the past, first there would be a fence, then there'd be a curb, then and then now it's been removed. That's a big deal. As well as, you know, the platform changed from 9 inches to 14 inches. Can you just let us know? Because then it's like, you know, you change something, you don't say anything. And so it would be nice to know what parameters you're changing. That's all. So thank you.
Thanks, Miles. I can, speak to the first question about, I think large vehicles, right? Whether those are for maintenance or for other uses. So yeah, our modeling does make assumptions about what we call heavy vehicles, which is really comes down to the characteristics of what it takes for a larger vehicle to accelerate or slow down, in terms of how we analyze how traffic moves throughout an area, right? So yeah, we do make assumptions for those. Just another dimension to that that's worth pointing out is, we also, through application of design standards, make sure to accommodate various vehicle sizes, to make sure all those important things that happen in cities, like trash pickup, trash delivery, move-ins, the FedEx truck or the Amazon van that comes by, making sure that all those vehicles can move and get access to various buildings. It's a city, so that is definitely a challenge, but I know the design team is working hard to sort of balance all the various needs to provide access for vehicles of those types, while also respecting the constraints of the area. I'll just acknowledge your comment about communicating those changes to you. If you've got questions, if anyone has questions as we're going through the process, feel free to ask those in case there's something that we miss in our communication.
Thanks, Charlie, and Miles, great point too. As parameters change and as the design evolves, which it's going to do as part of this design process, we'll absolutely be giving you some points of reference to know when things are changing. So that's a very fair point. And Devin, it looks like you've got your hand up. Thanks so much.
Hello, can you hear me?
We gotcha.
Great. First of all, thanks for this presentation. Really incredible stuff and a very exciting project. It's going to be transformative, just a huge statement that people who ride the bus deserve a dignified, fast trip to their destination just as much as anyone else does. So thank you for everyone's work and attention on this. My question for Charlie actually about the analysis. And I apologize if you addressed this already, but I'm curious if your analysis is going to look into, presumably fewer crashes, fewer injuries and deaths that will happen in this corridor as a result of this project.
Yeah, I didn't talk about safety analysis as a part of this, but we have the team has completed a safety analysis of the corridor. I think we can work with the project team to communicate some of those findings out at our next meeting. But just to give a brief explanation, Devin, when the city is doing a project, particularly one of the scale, we want to try to meet as many broader goals as possible, right? So we've spent a lot of time tonight talking about the movement of people and access to businesses and homes throughout the study area. Obviously, when we're doing a project, we also want to find ways to improve safety at the same time, right? That's a big part of the city's Vision Zero program, is trying to reduce particularly fatal and severe injury crashes, not just through safety projects, but by incorporating safety into other projects. So that is an approach we're taking here, and we can certainly report more on that next time.
Thanks, Devin. That's a great question, and the importance of safety. I know in my chats, that's a theme that kept coming up. And one of the things we probably should talk about more is the safety benefits of a center station where you're shortening the crossing distances on Colfax to slow traffic, slow speeds, but also shorten the amount of dangerous roadway that people of all mobility levels need to cross as they're getting across Colfax and to and from the station. So it's a really good point, and a point we should stress at every conversation that we have. So thank you for that. And David, I don't know if your hand is still up from before or if you have a follow-up question. Well,
no questions.
Okay, thanks, David. Abby, did we ever get a question from Javier in the chat? Or Javier, if you can unmute, we can try the audio again too.
Miles, we did get a question from Javier, and his question is on the developer side. He's wondering if there'll be parking reductions for new developments on Colfax.
That is a good question, and I think some of those questions too tie into to what the other Miles was bringing up on some of the NPI plans and how new developments will be assessed. But Charlie, I don't know how that's factoring into your analysis with new development and how parking is managed there.
The short answer is I don't know the answer to that question, but we can certainly investigate it. That's more in the area of expertise in zoning and building code, which is very different from surface mobility. So we can bring that question back next time when we talk about sort of assumptions we're making about the future. Let's make a note to do that and hit that next time. Great question.
Yep. Great question. And I think the importance of some of that planning work that goes into the neighborhood plans that address new development and the parking inventory on Colfax, but also some of those private lots that exist in the area too. So Javier, hopefully that helps to triangulate your question and know that we'll be addressing it later. Brian, I don't know. I know you've probably got to jump off here in a minute if you have anything to add on that coordination with other city departments.
Let us just circle back with community planning and development so we come back with a complete answer.
Perfect. That sounds great. Well, any other questions? I don't think I see any other hands up. Abby, and let's do maybe one more from the chat.
Okay, I think on this sort of on the theme of safety, there was a question more around what is the city doing to ensure sort of the safety of folks that are riding the Colfax BRT. And I think this is likely a question both on the design side and the operations side. And so just sort of ensuring the safety of transit riders in the future. So what considerations are being made there?
I can try to take a stab at that. I mean, it's certainly very important to the Hancock administration to look at safety and safety around crimes being committed or drug use in the city of Denver. When this corridor is actually constructed and operational, presumably will be under another mayor, but I'm certain that would be a top priority for any mayor of Denver. I don't know that we can talk specifics about that at this point in the study, but we definitely want to capture that concern. I believe in the wording of the chat, the concern is that literally it's bad enough now that this person was not even riding the 15 bus at all because of those kinds of concerns. So that's great information and feedback for us. We can certainly capture that concern and know that the city is definitely committed to providing safe places and safe transit. This is also an issue for RTD. The actual security on the bus itself would be a responsibility of RTD, and I know they're taking the concern very seriously as well. It's a complicated issue, but definitely one that the city is going to continue to prioritize.
Thanks, Brian. That's a great answer and great perspective. Phil, I see you got your hand up.
Well, I might offer a couple of other things. First of all, the new stations that we're designing are going to be including security cameras, significantly higher levels of lighting than you see currently on the corridor, much closer spacing, as you pointed out earlier, Miles, in terms of pedestrian access to the stations, minimizing vehicular and pedestrian conflicts, for example, certainly reducing vehicular and bus conflicts. So overall, we're going to be substantially improving both the safety and personal security throughout the entire corridor. That's really a fundamental point of this project.
Thanks, Phil. That's a great perspective and certainly going to be a topic that continues to come up in prioritizing safety for people on the bus, waiting for the bus, driving, walking, pedaling, rolling, however you move through Colfax. This project is an opportunity to improve the way we all move through this really important corridor in Denver. And with that, I think we're a quarter after, and we've fielded quite a few questions. If there are any remaining questions that we didn't get to tonight, feel free to go to colfaxbrt.org. You can get in touch with the project team there. The virtual engagement hub will have all of this information posted shortly, and we'll be emailing it out to the community, including the survey for the naming that is going to be active through the end of February. And thank you all. And I see we still got a strong contingent of folks here at 7:15. So we appreciate you staying after. Hopefully we answered as many of your questions as we could, and we look forward to continuing this conversation as we move forward into the design and with that modeling. So David Kretzinger, any final thoughts as our city's transit director?
Just reiterate the thanks for all the input. We really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Good night.